on teaching ethics, there's a calendar sometimes of workshops, and there's lots of workshops outside of UCCS. They do one, New Mexico does one in Santa Fe. There's other opportunities to do ethics workshops throughout the United States. And we actually have funds. Some of you don't have funds to travel. And even staff are able to do online ethics education or maybe go to some interesting conference or workshop, okay? The other thing that we do is we found that if we have champions in every college, that the students can see that enthusiasm. They have the ability to focus a little bit on their topic. And so we have over 31 ethics fellows at UCCS already. And so as we go around, I want to make sure that you introduce yourself if you are an ethics fellow. We used to say a former ethics fellow or a past ethics fellow. I was going to say old ethics fellow, and they got mad at that term. But we realized that once you're a fellow, you're always a fellow. So the new fellows, if you're a fellow for this year, 2016, 2017, please say that as well, and realize that you're in it for life. Okay? And even if you leave, we follow you. Okay. So then we also have introduced a Southern Colorado Higher Education Consortium, which you've probably heard about, and we support the other 9 schools in Southern Colorado. And so we were supposed to have had someone from Pikes Peak. I'm not sure if they made it in yet. But in the spring, when we have these roundtables, you will actually have the opportunity to hear from professors from Fort Lewis, Adams State, Western State, CSU Pueblo, Otero, Trinidad, Lamar, Pikes Peak, and Pueblo Community College. So they will all be taking turns, so look at the notices. So with that, we're going to introduce.
Oh,
Yeah.
here we go. Here's Jill Bradley, guys.
Well, do we want to go
Oh,
around?
let's go around first.
Let's
So
go
Jill
down
knows
first so
who
she
she
knows
is.
who you are, because Jill is going to talk about diversity and inclusiveness, which is an important topic. So she'll want to know who's in the room.
So let's start.
Go ahead. You want to start there?
No. Okay.
I'm Heather Plank, as a veteran in military student affairs.
I'll introduce myself.
Okay.
Sandy Ho, Languages and Social Sciences Center.
Regina Winters, I teach in the School of Public Affairs, and I'm one of those ethics fellows.
I'm Robin Pringle, Financial Administration College of Business. I'm also an MBA student.
Juan Gallego, I'm an instructor for marketing courses here at the College of Business. I also teach diversity and inclusion courses through law enforcement, so this is actually a topic that I really like.
I'm Wendy Adretti, Assistant Dean in the College of Business.
I'm Carla Myers. I'm a librarian and I'm a Daniels Fellow for this year.
I'm Casey Kawaguchi. I'm a financial analyst for the campus, and I work in the controller's office.
Alejandro de Jesus, Assistant Director of the University Center, and also a second-year cohort member of the SAHI program.
I'm Patty Wachowski. I'm coordinator and instructor in the Student Affairs and Higher Ed program in the College of Education, and then a current fellow this year.
I'm Debbie O'Connor. I'm the director of campus compliance at UCCS.
Waiting for Matt. I'm Anya Nguyen. I am in the office of the VCAF. I do policy and property lease management, and sometimes get to teach in the School of Public Affairs.
Hi, I'm Magdalene Lim from the UCCS Aging Center. I'm new here for 2 months from upstate New York, so like to support efforts in ethics and diversity.
I'm Nicole Watson. I have a year left in my master's for criminal justice. I also work full-time in foster care. So we work a lot with the Daniels Fund as well.
I'm Whitney Porter. I'm the Assistant Director for the Grad Office in the College of Business.
Sintwali Bakari, Vice Chancellor for Student Success.
I'm Rosie Rose Smith. I'm the Enrollment and Advising Specialist in the Graduate School in the College of Business, and I'm also a graduate student in the PA program.
I'm David Lee. I'm a lecturer in the College of Business. I teach creativity.
Scott Van Ness, instructor, College of Business, and former fellow, always a fellow. Yeah.
A lifer.
Yeah.
I'm Lance Pixley. I'm a student here at UCCS. Freshman. So.
Ethics Fund initiative for the opportunity to do this project. The idea behind this project, diversity inclusion, is to go beyond mere compliance issues, law, counting, EEOC, Civil Rights Act, and compliance with those laws, which is a lot of what we teach in our HR classes, and moving beyond that into an ethics perspective, and specifically focusing on the ethical principles. And what does that mean? What would be the difference in looking at it from an ethical perspective versus a mere compliance perspective? So that's the idea behind the project. It is still kind of a work in process. Towards the end, I'll actually have you guys kind of test run some of what I've been doing in my class, as far as these little mini cases that I have for how we might start applying the ethics-based principles into the diversity and inclusion. I will say, however, though, that, and it's probably not even needs to be said, that this is a very timely topic right now, and I would say probably after 16 years of teaching. So before this, I was on the faculty at Fresno State. I also taught for 6 years at Tulane University as a graduate student. I'm not a stranger to teaching. I've always been in public speaking since high school, but this is kind of a nerve-wracking presentation for me because it's a topic that is very sensitive to people right now. And the purpose of my project was to go beyond mere compliance when there's a lot of people probably feeling right now that, let's focus on compliance, because there are people who are afraid that even that basic level is not going to be happening. There's a lot of fear and uncertainty. So I do want to say that I'm not trying to imply, and was never trying to imply, that compliance is not an important issue. Rather that there can be some benefits to looking at it from an ethical perspective. And so, I kind of want to open up first by asking the question of what is a compliance mindset, and ask you what are the tools, laws, techniques that you're aware of for compliance with regard to diversity and inclusion in organizations. And then, speaking specifically about some of those, what are and have been the benefits of those, and what are or have been the limitations of that mere compliance mindset. So what does compliance, when you heard the title of this presentation, what comes to mind when you think of compliance?
I think a lot of times when we're just thinking about compliance, we're just counting numbers. Mm-hmm. We're making sure we're under the bar, over the bar, where the line is. We focus on that, stratifications, numbers, that'll be the first thing we'll talk about.
Okay.
When something like that comes.
Like a quantitative counting.
Yeah, it's like we're counting numbers. We have 4 of these, 5 of these, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, we're good.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, compliance. I was gonna pick on it.
You knew I was gonna say something. I think that a lot of times when people hear diversity and inclusiveness, I think the first thing that they go to, which would be like ADA, if they have the compliance mindset, okay, ADA, or like EEOC. And really they think about it, putting aside the ethical standpoint of it, just looking at the compliance standpoint of it, checking the box, saying, okay, how do I meet this regulation, as opposed to what's right for that human being themselves. I think that a lot of times that they're really, and I think the benefits to that is at least there's something to back up the individual if they get into a dilemma. But I think the bigger issue with just going with the compliance piece of it is that the majority of these laws are really, really vague. They're pretty gray. There's a lot of judgment taking place within them, and people apply them differently. Mm-hmm. So I think that the compliance mindset is more just like, hey, I'm going to take this rule or regulation, I'm going to check the box, not looking at the person themselves to say what's best for this individual or this community or this college or whatever it is that we're looking at, which can be a disservice.
Right. And I think you're absolutely right. There's so much gray area there, and unless people are really concerned about why we're doing it, then it's very easy to count some number, find something where we say we did it, we're fine. So, anyone else?
I always kind of think about building that
legal defense case
Yeah.
in case litigation is coming into the future. I mean, you're building that documentation to make sure, you know, that you're protected in the future. So I think compliance, if you're kind of focused on that, you may miss the whole purpose.
Right. And you know, I have to say that was kind of one of the reasons I was really interested in this project too, because as teaching HR, you know, a lot of times I find myself saying, well, you need to do this because you don't want to be sued. And then I think, but it's more than that. It's, you don't want to be sued, of course, but you also don't want to be doing the wrong thing or something that, you know, is not treating people with respect and integrity and fairness and all of those ethical principles. So I think it's really important to, yes, of course we want to comply and avoid legislation and lawsuits, but why are we doing it and what are the underlying principles there? So that was kind of the purpose there. Any other kind of address sort of the benefits and the limitations in some of those comments? Any other limitations that you see?
I think sometimes once you've met your, whatever you're trying to do, you just stop there. You're not digging in any further. Okay, we're good, let's go forward.
Okay.
So,
It sets a minimum bar.
yeah, once we've gotten over the bar, we may not always look to raise the bar.
Okay.
I think it takes the people, the person, out of the equation. That's, to me, the limitation. I mean, we're doing what's, to stay out of trouble, we're doing what we can to stay out of trouble instead of what's right. And the ethics focus I really love because that's doing what's right. Let's focus on the person.
So I'll show you some results on the next slide. And this is just focusing on one outcome. Some other limitations that I have found in my research, they're very much similar to the things you were saying. But another one would be backlash. So that some of the traditional diversity focuses, diversity training in particular, some of the data that I'm going to be showing you, there was a study done, published in the American Sociological Review. It was a compilation of data from more than 800 organizations, and they were looking at the effects of traditional diversity training. And this, and you know, I don't know if any of you remember this, but it was in the New York Times. It got a lot of press, and the headline was essentially "Diversity Training Doesn't Work." And to me, you know, I always, you know, pause at the media's interpretation because I'm afraid then, you know, what is going to be the outcome of that. And I like to believe that it's not that diversity training as a whole doesn't work, but the way that we're doing diversity training, or when they look at these 800 organizations, whatever is being done in this diversity training appears not to be very effective. And they looked at several different outcomes. Here's one chart. This is different types, so mandatory diversity training, and the only outcome they're looking at here in this one chart, I just wanted to give you an overview, is representation, the percent change over 5 years in representation of among managers in diverse groups. And they looked just at a few different kinds of trainings that are common in a lot of different organizations. And the outcome here was not very positive. And if you look at other outcomes as well, the trend is similar. So change in attitudes, change in promotion rates for different groups. A lot of the traditional methods don't appear to be working. And part of the reason, especially one of their conclusions, strong conclusions, if you read the full paper from the American Sociological Review, was that especially mandatory diversity training is particularly not effective, and there's a backlash, there's sensitivity there, and that sometimes people feel more divided after it, depending on what is focused on the training. So it can emphasize stereotypes, emphasize group fault lines and divisions between people. So you know, that's a little disconcerting, and it goes along with some other research by Thomas and Robin Ely. I met her several years ago, and they do a lot of research, real organizations, and they went out and they actually, this research has been published in a lot of different sources, And what they've done is they've studied different organizations and tried to look at the different, categorize kind of the different approaches that different organizations take to diversity. And they came up with 3 rough categories. One is discrimination and fairness, and I'll talk about each one of these. The next is access and legitimacy, and the third is integration and learning. And this first one, discrimination and fairness, is very much the, what I'm kind of calling the compliance mindset. So focusing on the quantitative, like Scott mentioned, this quantitative focus on monitoring and achieving diversity. Like, we're there, we got the numbers, we check all the boxes, we're not being sued, so we're good. Things that tend to go along with this mindset, they found that in these organizations, there's an attempt to be color or gender blind, sort of pretend like, well, we're gonna treat everyone the same, everyone's the same, we're all the same, and not really recognizing people have different perspectives and different backgrounds and ideas and values, and actually kind of trying to stifle or limit conversations around differences because it's a dirty word or something that we're not supposed to treat people differently, view people differently, so we're just going to stifle all of that conversation. And that is, arguably better than not complying and doing those things. But what they found is that these are the very situations where you're finding, kind of the data that I showed you before here, where we're not really moving things forward. The access and legitimacy approach, this is the next sort of category that they identified in organizations. And here, and then these are kind of rough categories. It's not that every organization clearly fits into one and only one, so it's a little bit of an oversimplification. But the basic paradigm here would be, so that they're good with the numbers, they've achieved their diversity numbers in the aggregate, so they look sort of diverse when you look at the numbers overall in their organization. But if you dig deeper, the diversity may only exist in certain parts of the organization. So this happened, and I'm not going to name the company, but this happened when I was in New Orleans as a grad student. We went to do a diversity research project in an organization we were invited in, and it was supposed to be on gender and race and ethnicity specifically. And when we got the numbers from the organization, when they agreed to do the study, it was like, oh, well, there's a lot of diversity going on. This is going to be a great organization to go do our project. And when we went there, they were diverse, yes, but as a whole organization. So when we looked at managers, there was one woman manager and no racial or ethnic diversity there. So it was like, well, this group of employees is of this group or demographic, and so it was very much segregated. And so it actually, we couldn't even do the study because we were not able to find the actual diversity there that we wanted within throughout the organization. So what you might find here is cases of pigeonholing, segregating, or matching race, gender, or other demographic characteristics of employees with customers. And this has been something that has been talked a lot about with marketing, and there's actually been a number of legal cases regarding this. Anyone familiar with any of those cases, or is that even clear what I'm referring to here? The matching.
You're trying to assign accounts to like people who look the same or
right.
come from the same place.
Right.
Yeah, there's been a bunch of cases.
So we're trying to attract this clientele, this customer base. So let's put someone that looks like them on the commercial, or let's match up the accounts with people from that similar demographic. So a lot of people, and I actually do a case, and I can share it with anyone who's interested. It's not my own case, but it's one that's published in a teaching journal, and it's based on a real organization that is de-identified, so you don't know the name. But I give it to my students, and I give it to them in two parts. And I show them, you know, well, this organization looks to be really diverse, and they're trying to reach out to these different customer groups, and it sort of all appears to be good on the surface. And then you give them the second part of the case, and they see, well, but then that leads to differences in commissions that the people are receiving. And is it necessarily fair or appropriate to be matching people simply based on demographics if it's not based on skill, it's not based on their background or expertise, knowledge, it's just based solely on the demographics. And then of course we go into the legal cases that have arisen, going back to the compliance mindset. So, you know, it really is both. It's the ethics, why are we doing this, what's the impact on the person, the people, and then also what is the law and what has case law told us.
Jill, I
Yes.
think also if you wanted to see what, if you're listening to this and thinking, oh, it's those other companies, go on to our website and look at our affirmative action plan, because we break it down by the job group. So while we look as a campus, we meet the aggregate, the large umbrella, we're fine. When you drill down into job groups and titles and departments, you start to see where our gaps are. And it's something we're working to try to fill, but it's not bad here, but it is, you can see it in any organization.
Yeah, I mean, and I can, you know, I think that it could also involve working with, like I know, like the PhD project has talked a lot about the pipeline issue. We need to start reaching out to undergraduates and high school students and trying to get people into areas where it hasn't been historically very diverse.
By the way, Jill, I forgot to mention, the reason we handed these out is Jill would like us, we do this all the time, but we're gonna do this for both presentations. So if you have a great idea for diversity and inclusiveness, even if it's not just for her class, but for the university or for the student organizations or the faculty or staff, please write it down because we'll collect them.
That'd be great because it's very much a work in progress. Like I said, there's, you know, things have changed in the past few days even. So, and even if you see concerns with sort of the presentation or the materials I'm using in class or have suggestions that you don't want to share in a larger group, I would love to have you write that down. So, yeah, the case study is on neighborhood foods, and I'd be happy, like I said, I'd be happy to share that with anyone if you want. The last sort of diversity paradigm that Thomas and Ely observed was integration of learning. And here, what it sort of looked like in the collective when you go and look at what's going on in these organizations with this approach to diversity is that there's a recognition of a common shared identity. So we're sort of, you know, we're all Americans, or we're all, you know, part of UCCS or the University of Colorado. We're all, so creating a shared or common identity, but also recognizing that there are unique and distinct identities within that people bring. Because there's a lot of research that shows when you only focus on one or the other, that's kind of where you can create fault lines, or sort of the colorblind approach where people feel like they are being ignored and the diversity is not being recognized. So that simultaneous recognition that we're in this together, we're all part of the same organization or society or, you know, whatever the larger identity is, but also distinct identities that people bring. And group members would be encouraged to share diverse ideas, experiences, and perspectives to work, of course, with the recognition that, with going back to the common shared identity and purpose, organizations, by definition, you know, we have a shared purpose that we're trying to achieve. And so we have different ideas about how we might do that, but we are all going to go back to working together with those toward that common objective. Some other approaches that are not strictly compliance-based that you see in some of these organizations would be perspective-taking training. So not training focused specifically on, well, you can't do this, and you can't do that. Don't sexually harass people, so not the very basic stuff, and going into giving people more complex scenarios, and that's kind of what I've tried to achieve with the case that I've developed, which I'll share with you in a few minutes. Going beyond these very simplistic, examples where someone has blatantly discriminated against someone else, and then students say, well, duh, you can't do that, and that's illegal, to actually, having a complex situation where people are saying, oh, I never thought about somebody having that perspective, or that's why they would be opposed to that policy. So that kind of training, mentoring, so there's a lot of research showing that underrepresented groups don't have the same networks, and your social network is very important. Informal and formal mentoring can be important in trying to bring people in to a network where they're going to learn and get that access to other people and experience. Relationship building, whether it's network groups, among people, and transparency of processes and procedures. So one thing that I didn't really mention as far as some of the drawbacks of the compliance mindset would be with regard to affirmative action. And it's not necessarily that affirmative action is bad in itself, it's the misperception by a lot of people of what it is. For example, students often think this. A lot of people think that it is about the counting, like it's a quota. We're achieving a certain number. And when in fact the Supreme Court has actually ruled against quota systems in a lot of cases. And so trying to be very transparent in the way we're selecting people so that people are not brought in under the impression that they were not brought there legitimately. One thing that Madeline Heilman, Claude Steele, there's a lot of researchers who talk about the stigma of incompetence. And so that when organizations, there's kind of this ironic effect when organizations are really saying, we're promoting diversity and they're acting like this quota system or trying to get the numbers, is that the stigma of incompetence when people are brought in who are from underrepresented groups, they're sort of viewed with the misperception that, well, maybe they weren't brought here because they're the most competent person. They were brought here to fill a number or a gap, and so it can be setting people up to fail unless you're very transparent about how we're selecting people, why we're promoting certain individuals, and assuring people that when someone is brought in, that it's not because they're just filling some sort of underrepresented gap, it's because they're competent and capable and they were the best person to do the job. So the ethics mindset for diversity and inclusion, it really is kind of going back to Tracy's introduction about this shouldn't just be, one time, it really needs to be integrated. And I just think that, I pulled this off the Daniels 10 website, that this basic statement about ethics can apply perfectly to the case of diversity. So our belief is that ethics education must convey that principles are constant foundations, not relative to a specific situation, that doing what is right prevails over self-interest when the two may appear to be in conflict. So trying to take that and apply that into different situations in the workplace. And so in thinking about what ethical principles can be applied and how and what are the possible benefits, so if we, and I'm not sure if you can read, I didn't put all the specific definitions here, but what would this mean in terms of applying some of the principles? And I'll have you go ahead and think about that. You can work in small groups when I'm gonna have you work on this. Actually, do you mind helping me there? Here. And then while that's going around, I'll just share with you some more encouraging data, some of these other.
We have to share. Do we have to share how many you get or not?
I printed 25.
Okay, we can share.
Share.
Yep, share.
So here are some of the other kinds of diversity initiatives that Davin and Caleb looked at in those 800 organizations.
Oh, I think you share.
And you can see that some of the other kinds of strategies that are going beyond your compliance are more effective, at least in terms of this one outcome that I'm showing you. So these are little mini cases that are going around, and I'd like you to, this is what I've been using this semester with my students. I've gotten some positive feedback, but still looking for changes. And you can work on it alone if you want, or discuss with your neighbors. Might be more fun or enlightening to discuss with. If there's any that raise particular questions for you or discussion points that, one that was really interesting, if you want to bring that up and tell me what your response was or share it with the group.
I'd like to know what people thought of number 4. We were just kind of getting to it. Because this is, Scott and I felt like this is something I haven't seen so much in the university setting, but coming from the military background, there was a lot of, that phrase was used a lot, where a supervisor would walk in the room and say, hey, it's inappropriate to speak a different language in the workplace. And of course, this was, a few years ago, so I'd be curious to know what the philosophy around that is. Yeah.
I kind of just in the language center, my tutors are working and they're supporting foreign languages in ASL. And they told me before I came, they said, oh, sorry, we're speaking Spanish to each other and not everybody understands Spanish, we don't want to be rude. And I was like, okay, that's
language center.
Right, I was like, one of the benefits of working in the language center is that you get to utilize your language skills, your foreign language or ASL, or even English for English language learners, as much as you can. So I was like, if anything, I'm going to say something if I see you standing next to somebody and I know your third language is their first language, and you're not practicing it. I'm gonna be like, why are you speaking in English? Because I understand the whole point of some people are like, well, what if they're talking about me? Well, you trust that people aren't talking about you. But, and Heather had a great point about but then when Americans go overseas, we just speak English to everybody and we think that, well, you just, it's English, everybody should speak English. And that's not the case, right? But here, it's if I was speaking Korean to my mom, people would be like, oh, she's not speaking English. Can you speak in English? Like, I can, but, I'm speaking to my mother and I have to speak Korean to her, So I think that you gotta take that stigma of it's rude out.
Yeah.
But
I would agree. I work with refugees in foster care, and they all speak a ton of different languages, and it's a bonding thing for them too. And I think that's beautiful in itself, honestly. For instance, last night I had a kid come in from Kenya, and we had some of our Swahili speaking kids already in the program come with us to the airport. And just right off the airplane, they were speaking Swahili together, and it was awesome, and it made the girl coming feel so much more comfortable. And I think that's where things lie, it's the comfort, and we have to trust that people aren't, be optimistic, I guess.
In this situation, it's in a work center, and if you're trying to build this culture, you may want to have a common language. I could see both sides of it, but I had a situation with the supervisor, had folks, there were a couple folks that spoke Tagalog, which no one else in the work center spoke. And these guys would do it sometimes in front of customers, and the supervisor said, hey, you guys need to speak English in here. You're making the customers feel uncomfortable. Nobody feels like, you're not part of the team. You could be in a conversation, they break into Tagalog. How do you handle a situation like that ethically and still recognize, that it's okay that you speak that way? But how do we? And it's a tough line for a manager in a situation like that to try to build teamwork, and still recognize that.
It kind of, for me, it goes back to that common identity and distinct identities. Looking at all those, how do we accomplish that for the principles for everyone?
It wasn't easy. Yeah.
Legally, I can say there have been a number of cases of English-only laws, and a lot of it comes down to the business necessity. So, if it's a safety issue on a manufacturing floor, and people can't understand English, or they're not sharing a common language, then that's a time where it might be appropriate But in a break room where, you know, it's just, well, I think they're talking about me, you know, then that's a very different situation.
Yeah, I have a quick comment. I come from Singapore, and because it's a multiracial society, we have English as the first language. So Chinese is my second language. I hardly get to speak Chinese, but when I see somebody, you know, from China, from Taiwan, and even from Hong Kong, we like to use our own language, and it just feels like we can connect easily because we tend to use less words to express, you know, more of what we want to say. And so I think in a setting where, you know, we get excited talking about the same language, I think it's important to be mindful about people around us. And if we also need to include them, and sometimes we'll say, oh, you know, oh, we're just talking about this, and then we can switch to English if that is a language we could understand or speak. But in talking about refugees, of course, it's slightly different, but still they can understand, you know. So I think there's a way that we could try and include people and be mindful. Well, of course, we all have confidential kind of talks, little things. But then I think that volume might be a little bit softer sometimes if there's a way to regulate that. Feels to me like I would be happy to be included in anybody else's kind of social, you know, kind of setting to be sharing, you know. So I know that sounds ideal, but hopefully we can try.
Right. Right. I agree. Is there another question you want to go over? We only have a couple more minutes.
I couldn't agree more. I was thinking about kind of what you started with in the how the individual and these broad policies, the individual is important to consider, because the two items that are in balance here are creating a culture and making people feel welcome, yet, you know, unity amongst the whole group. So, you know, a broad policy that applies to every situation. I like what you said, kind of so the manager would make that discretionary decision. Is this the good for the group? You know, can we have these conversations in a way that we explain and pull people in? You know, that's why I see this is a great example, and it illustrates the complexity.
Have you used these before? Yeah, I wrote them and we used them for the fall, and it created a lot of good discussion. Some of them more than others. Like I said, some of them were pretty much, people were like, well, obviously, but I don't know. Are there any others that were questionable?
Well, on policy too, I was just curious with the primary language not being understood, like from a call center perspective, if that was like a bona fide occupational qualification, or how that kind of, if customers can't understand what the business would do in that situation.
And that's sort of the contrast, you know, to the general policy of English only everywhere, that the job necessity, it's very dependent on what the job is and what is the requirement. Is it necessary, and when that people be speaking English?
Because we thought even if you pass the oral communication fluency test, you still may have such a strong accent that there still could be enunciation and understanding issues. So that, I just think that they may not be addressing really the issue. Like that may not solve their
Oh,
problem.
I see. Right. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it could cause some conflict too, the previous employees and the new employees coming on that are able to speak, like, how do you deal with that situation?
That's true. That's very true. That's not a point that was brought up either. So, I mean, any of these things, if you want to share them with me, that's great. There's not, a lot of them don't have a clear right or wrong answer. A lot of them could say, well, this is what the court has ruled, or this is the interpretation. But, you know, if they're the complex issues, they're supposed to be complex issues. If you can think of other situations that you've personally seen in the workplace that were, that created a real dilemma. It wasn't a very extreme blatant case that was obvious. If you can think of those and you share them with me, that'd be great too. I'd love to write some more cases along those lines to give richness of true experiences that people have had. So,
I have a question. Do you use them as discussion, or do you grade them, or
they're discussion.
If you were going to, if someone says, you know, how do you know if we got the right solution? You know, students want it to be right or wrong.
Well, what I've done, and I joke with the students that it depends in the class. But, so what I've done with it so far is the answers are not graded. As far as what is a right answer or how would this be tested, I might say, there was a Supreme Court case regarding the use of quota systems. What was the decision and, how would it be interpreted? So making it a question.
That they have to apply something.
Right, but I haven't been giving a real clear, well, that's wrong
Yeah,
on,
no, you
on
shouldn't.
this particular assignment, so that's been my approach. Thank you very much, and that would be